Push, Ava! He's almost here! Her fingers clenched the hospital sheets as another wave tore through her body. Through the haze of pain, she saw him, the man who'd paid her to carry his child, burst through the delivery room doors, panic flashing across his controlled billionaire mask. He wasn't supposed to care, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. The fluorescent lights blurred above her as the nurses rushed around, their voices overlapping in urgent commands. Ava's scream pierced the sterile air, raw and primal. Steve Harrington stood frozen in the doorway, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly seeming absurd in this room of life and blood and chaos. His hands trembled at his sides, a sight that would have shocked anyone who knew him as the ruthless CEO who'd built an empire before 40. "Sir, you need to step back," a nurse said, but he didn't move. His eyes were locked on Ava, and in them she saw something that terrified her more than the pain, genuine fear, for her. Another contraction ripped through her, and she bore down with everything she had. The baby's cry filled the room seconds later, thin and reedy at first, then stronger. The sound seemed to crack something open in Steve's chest. His breath caught audibly, and when the nurse placed the tiny, squirming infant on Ava's chest, he took one involuntary step forward before catching himself. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. "A healthy boy." Ava's hands trembled as she touched the baby's wrinkled face, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions she'd promised herself she wouldn't feel. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this connection. And she definitely wasn't supposed to look up and see tears tracking down Steve Harrington's face. 3 months earlier, Ava had sat in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and old money, staring at a contract that felt like both salvation and surrender. The words blurred together: compensation, medical care, confidentiality, relinquishment of parental rights. Her hands shook as she held the pen. "Are you certain about this, Miss Chen?" the lawyer asked, his tone professionally neutral, but his eyes kind. "My sister needs surgery," Ava said quietly. "The bills are drowning us, so, yes, I'm certain." She'd seen Steve Harrington only once before signing, through the glass window of the conference room. He'd been on a phone call, his back to her, radiating the kind of power that made people instinctively step aside. His assistant had explained everything with clinical efficiency. Mr. Harrington's wife had died 2 years ago during childbirth, along with their unborn son. He wanted a child, an heir, but he wanted no emotional complications, no attachments, no personal contact, just a straightforward business arrangement. "He's offering $500,000, the assistant had said, "plus all medical expenses and a trust fund for your sister's ongoing care." It was more money than Ava would see in 10 years of working double shifts at the diner, more than enough to save her sister, and maybe, just maybe, start over. She'd signed the contract without reading every clause. Maybe that had been her first mistake. The first 2 months passed in a blur of medical appointments and isolation. Ava moved into a luxury apartment Steve's company provided. Too big, too quiet, too empty. Every interaction went through his assistant, a polished woman named Claire, who spoke in carefully measured tones and never asked personal questions. Ava felt like a walking incubator, reduced to numbers on ultrasound screens and percentiles and growth charts. She'd lie awake at night, one hand on her growing belly, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. The baby would kick, and she'd whisper to him in the darkness, "I'm sorry I can't keep you. I'm sorry this is how your story begins." Then she'd remind herself that this baby would have everything: wealth, privilege, opportunities she could never provide. She was giving him a better life. That's what she told herself anyway. Steve existed only as a signature on checks, and a name she wasn't supposed to speak. She saw his face sometimes on like business news sites, always controlled, always composed. The caption usually read something like, "Harrington Industries CEO expands tech empire," or "Billionaire philanthropist announces new foundation." He seemed more concept than person, more myth than man. That changed during her 4th month. Ava had been waiting in the doctor's office, leafing through a magazine she wasn't really reading, when the room tilted sideways. She heard someone call her name as if from underwater, felt her knees buckle, and then there was nothing but darkness. She came to an exam table with worried faces hovering over her. But it was the face in the back of the room that made her heart stutter. Steve Harrington, pressed against the wall, his usual composure shattered into something raw and afraid. Low blood sugar, the doctor was saying. Nothing serious, but you need to eat more regularly, Miss Chen. No skipping meals. I didn't skip, Ava started, but her voice came out weak. She'd been trying to save money, rationing the grocery allowance because she wanted to send extra funds to her sister. Pride and poverty made strange bedfellows. After the doctor left, silence hung heavy in the room. Steve cleared his throat, the sound almost startling in the quiet. My assistant said you've been declining the meal service. I can cook for myself, Ava said, struggling to sit up. Her head still felt fuzzy. Apparently not well enough. His voice came out sharper than he seemed to intend. He ran a hand through his dark hair, mussing the perfect style. I'll have Claire arrange for daily meal delivery, non-negotiable. I don't need... My son needs you healthy. The words hung between them, clinical and cold, but something flickered in his eyes that contradicted the tone. Let me drive you. Home. Your assistant can... I'm already here. He was already holding the door open, and Ava realized that arguing would take more energy than she had. She let him guide her to the elevator, acutely aware of his hand hovering near her elbow, not touching, but protective nonetheless. His car was exactly what she'd expected, sleek, black, worth more than most houses. The leather seat seemed to embrace her as she sank into it. Steve drove in silence for several blocks before speaking. Claire told me about your sister, he said quietly. Leukemia. Ava stiffened. That's not part of the contract. No, but it's why you're doing this. He stopped at a red light and finally looked at her. Really looked at her. How is she? The question, delivered with such unexpected gentleness, cracked something in Ava's carefully maintained walls. Better. The treatment is working. She starts physical therapy next month. Good. The light changed, but he didn't immediately accelerate. That's good. They didn't speak again until he pulled up in front of her building, but the silence felt different now, less empty. As Ava reached for the door handle, Steve's voice stopped her. I lost my wife, Caroline, during labor. The baby, too. The words came out flat, rehearsed from repetition, but pain bled through anyway. The doctor said there were complications, unexpected. Everything happened so fast. Ava turned back, finding him staring straight ahead through the windshield. I'm sorry. The contract, the distance, it's not personal. It's survival. His jaw tightened. I needed an heir, but I can't. You don't have to explain, Ava said softly. But he continued as if she hadn't spoken. I thought if I kept it clinical, businesslike, I could protect myself from... He stopped, shook his head. But then I was in that doctor's office today, and I saw you collapse, and I realized something. His eyes finally met hers, and in them she saw a mirror of her own fear. This isn't as simple as I thought it would be. Ava's breath caught. The smart thing would have been to get out of the car, to maintain the boundaries the contract demanded. Instead, she heard herself say, No, it's not. After that day, the walls between them began to crumble in small, devastating increments. Steve started appearing at her appointments, claiming his assistant was busy, or that he happened to be nearby. They were flimsy excuses, and they both knew it. After each visit, he'd drive her home, and their conversations would stretch longer, deeper. He told her about building his company from nothing, about the sacrifices and battles. She told him about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, about practically raising her younger sister, about dreams she'd shelved to survive. He learned that she'd wanted to be a teacher. She learned that he'd wanted to be an architect before his father's company collapsed, and he'd had to rebuild from the ashes. You could still teach, Steve said one evening as they sat in his car outside her building. It had become a ritual, these moments of suspended time before real life intruded again. Ava laughed, the sound tinged with sadness. With what credentials? I dropped out of college to take care of my sister. Credentials can be earned. He turned to face her fully. After this is over, if you wanted to go back to school, I'm not your charity project, Steve. The words came out harder than she intended, but she needed to say them, needed to maintain some illusion of independence. No, he agreed quietly, you're not. But his eyes said something else. His eyes said she was becoming something far more complicated and terrifying than charity. The baby kicked, a firm nudge against Ava's ribs, and without thinking, she took Steve's hand and pressed it to her belly. His eyes widened as he felt the movement, and the wonder on his face made her heart ache. "He's strong," Steve whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Like his father," Ava said, then immediately regretted it. Too personal, too real. But Steve didn't pull away. His hand stayed on her belly, feeling his son move beneath his palm, and in that moment, the contract between them felt like a lie. They weren't a businessman and surrogate. They were a man and a woman, connected by the life growing between them, drowning in feelings neither of them knew how to name. I really should hit subscribe before I forget. Videos this good are rare. The turning point came during her 7th month. Ava had a late afternoon appointment that ran long due to some additional tests the doctor wanted. By the time they finished, early evening had settled over the city, and dark clouds promised a storm. Steve, who'd attended the appointment, suggested they waited out at his estate outside the city rather than risk driving through bad weather. "I'll have you back in a few hours," he said, as rain began to splatter the windshield. "There's a full staff. You'll be comfortable." Ava should have insisted on going home, should have recognized the danger in spending more time alone with him, but the thought of her empty apartment held no appeal, and she found herself nodding. His estate took her breath away. Sprawling grounds, a house that looked more like a classical manor than a modern home. But it was the smaller details that struck her as Steve led her inside. Photographs on the mantel showed a younger, happier version of him, with his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. Caroline. "You can wait in the library," Steve said, gesturing to a room lined with books. "I'll have the chef prepare something." But the storm intensified faster than anyone expected. Wind rattled the windows, and rain lashed against the glass in sheets. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in an eerie glow. Steve found Ava still in the library, standing by the window, and watching nature's fury. He carried an old-fashioned oil lamp that threw dancing shadows across his face. "The roads are flooded," he said. "You'll have to stay the night. I've had a guest room prepared." "Of course." Ava tried to keep her voice neutral, but something about the storm, the isolation, the flickering light made her feel unmoored from reality. Or maybe it was the way Steve was looking at her. They sat together in the library as the storm raged outside, the silence between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Steve spoke. "I come here when I need to remember," he said quietly. Caroline loved this house. She picked out every piece of furniture, every painting. She wanted to fill it with children, with life. "You must miss her terribly," Ava said. "Every day." He paused, his jaw working. "But I've also started to realize that grief can become its own kind of prison. I've been locked in mine for 2 years, and I thought I could keep hiding there." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Ava saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "But then you collapsed in that doctor's office, and something in me broke open. I was terrified, not for the baby, for you." "Steve," she started, but he continued. "The night Caroline died, I was in a business meeting. I'd promised to leave early, to be there for her appointment, but I stayed for one more contract, one more deal. I got the call an hour later." His voice cracked. "She died calling for me, and I wasn't there. I've carried that guilt every day since." Ava's throat tightened. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I chose work over her. I always chose work. And then she was gone, and I couldn't breathe under the weight of it. When I decided to have another child, I thought if I kept it all transactional, kept my distance, I could avoid ever feeling that pain again." "But it didn't work," Ava said softly. He turned back to her, and in the lamplight, she saw tears on his face. "No, because somewhere along the way, I started caring about you. Really caring. The way you talk to your belly when you think no one's listening. How you always save the last bite of dessert for later. The fact that you refuse to watch sad movies because life is hard enough already." He moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair so their eyes were level. "I know I have no right to feel this way. I know the contract says—" "Forget the contract," Ava whispered. "Just for tonight, forget the contract." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "I'm falling in love with you, Ava. Maybe I have been since that day in the car. And I know it's wrong and complicated, and I'm probably the last person you should trust with your heart, but she kissed him. Later, she wouldn't be able to say who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers, and nothing had ever felt more right or more terrifying. The baby kicked between them, a reminder of the impossible situation they had created. But for that moment, in the lamplight and storm, they let themselves pretend the world was simpler than it was. They talked through the night, the conversation flowing from childhood memories to fears to dreams. Steve told her about his father's suicide after the business collapsed, about building his empire as much from anger as ambition. Ava confessed her terror of becoming like her mother, working herself to death for scraps, always one emergency away from disaster. They dissected their choices, their regrets, their hopes. "I want you in his life," Steve said as dawn began to break through the dissipating storm clouds. "Not as the surrogate, as—" he struggled for words. "As his mother, if you want that." "I signed a contract," Ava reminded him, even as her heart soared at the possibility. "Contracts can be torn up." He took her hand. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I also know that I don't want to raise him without you. I don't want to live my life without you." For the first time in months, Ava let herself hope. Let herself imagine a future that looked nothing like the one she'd resigned herself to. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." But hope, as it turned out, was a fragile thing. The next few weeks passed in a careful bubble. Steve was more present, more attentive. They went to appointments together, picked out nursery furniture together, talked about names and schools and futures. Ava felt herself relaxing into the possibility of happiness, even as a small voice in her head whispered that it was too good to be true. The voice was right. Steve had invited her to a family dinner at his mother's house, a sign, he said, that he wanted her integrated into his life. Ava had spent hours getting ready, wanting to make a good impression, but when they arrived, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "So, this is the surrogate," Steve's mother, Margaret Harrington, said, her voice dripping with disdain. She was elegant in the way that old money demanded, perfectly coiffed hair, pearls that probably cost more than Ava's car, and eyes that could freeze blood. "This is Ava," Steve corrected firmly. "And she's more than—" "Oh, I know what she is." Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut. "A paid womb. Very efficient, dear. Much better than the messy business of dating, I suppose." Ava's face burned. Steve's hand tightened on her arm. "Mother, that's enough." "Is it?" Margaret turned to Ava directly. "I'm sure you think you've landed quite well for yourself. A poor girl suddenly swimming with the sharks. But let me be clear, you'll deliver the baby, take your money, and disappear. That was the arrangement." "The arrangement changed," Steve said coldly. "Did it? Or did she simply play her part better than you expected?" Margaret's laugh was cruel. "Really, Steve, I raised you to be smarter than this. She's doing exactly what any clever woman in her position would do, securing her future through you. It's the oldest game in the book." "You don't know what you're talking about," Steve started, but Ava had heard enough. She pulled her arm free and turned to leave, but Margaret's voice followed her. $500,000 for 9 months of work. Most people would call that a generous salary for lying on your back. Don't get greedy, dear." Ava made it to the front door before the tears came. She heard Steve calling after her, heard the shouting match that erupted between him and his mother, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't breathe. A paid womb. Is that all she was? Is that all anyone would ever see? She called a cab, and by the time Steve caught up to her, she was already inside it. He tapped on the window, his face anguished. "Ava, please, don't listen to her. She doesn't matter." "But she's right, isn't she?" Ava said through the glass. "This was always a business arrangement. You're the billionaire. I'm the poor girl who got lucky. People will always see it that way." "I don't see it that way." "Maybe you should." She wiped at her tears angrily. "Maybe we both should. I don't want to be anyone's guilt project, Steve. I don't want to be the charity case you fell for because I happen to be carrying your child. I want—" Her voice broke. "I want to be chosen for me, just me, and I don't know if that's even possible anymore." "Ava," she told the driver to go, and as the cab pulled away, she watched Steve standing in the driveway, backlit by his mother's mansion, and felt the final piece of her hope shatter. The next 2 weeks were agony. Steve called, texted, sent letters. Ava ignored them all, threw herself into preparing for the birth alone. She'd done everything alone before. She could do it again. The baby would be born, she'd sign the papers, and she'd walk away with enough money to start over somewhere far from here. Somewhere she couldn't run into Steve on the street and feel her heart break all over again. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Labor started 3 weeks early, fast and furious. Ava barely made it to the hospital before the contractions overwhelmed her. Through the haze of pain, she'd heard the nurses calling someone, heard a familiar voice demanding to be let through. And then there he was, Steve Harrington, bursting through the delivery room doors like a man possessed, panic and love and fear written all over his face. Now, holding their son for the first time, Ava looked up at him through exhausted tears. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." He moved closer, his eyes fixed on the baby. "But I couldn't stay away. I tried, Ava. I tried to respect your wishes. But when I got the call that you were in labor," his voice broke. "I couldn't let you do this alone." The nurse took the baby to clean and weigh him, and in that moment of quiet, Steve knelt beside Ava's bed. I'm sorry for my mother, for the contract, for every way I've hurt you, but I'm not sorry for falling in love with you. I won't apologize for that. Steve, I don't want you to be my guilt project or my charity case. I want you to be my partner, my equal, the woman I choose every single day. Not because you're carrying my child, but because you're brilliant and strong, and you make me want to be better." He took her hand. "But if you can't forgive me, if you want to walk away, I'll sign over full custody. I'll set up a trust fund big enough that you and our son never have to worry about money again. I won't fight you." Ava stared at him, searching his face for any sign of manipulation or half-truths. But all she saw was a man who'd been broken by loss and was terrified of being broken again. A man who loved their son. A man who maybe, impossibly, loved her too. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared that I'm not enough. That I'll never fit into your world. That one day you'll wake up and realize you could have done so much better." "Better than you?" Steve's laugh was choked with emotion. "Ava, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You sacrificed everything for your sister. You faced this pregnancy with grace and courage even when I kept you at arm's length. You made me feel alive again when I thought I was dead inside." He pressed her hand to his lips. "You are more than enough. You've always been more than enough." The nurse returned with their son, now cleaned and swaddled. As she placed him in Ava's arms, the baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching. Steve reached out tentatively, and Ava shifted so he could touch their child's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around Steve's thumb with surprising strength, and they both laughed through their tears. "What should we name him?" Ava asked softly. "I was thinking Thomas," Steve said. "After your father." Ava's breath caught. "How did you—" "You mentioned him once. Said he died when you were 7, but that he used to call you his little teacher." Steve's eyes were soft. "I thought our son should carry that name, carry that love." Fresh tears spilled down Ava's cheeks, but they were different tears now, healing tears. Thomas Chen Harrington." "Chen Harrington," Steve repeated, smiling. "I like that, a new family, a new start." But Ava pulled back slightly, needing to be clear. "I need time, Steve. I need to figure out who I am outside of being pregnant, outside of being the surrogate. I need to know that when I stand beside you, I'm standing as myself, not as someone you saved or someone who owes you." "Take all the time you need," Steve said immediately. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is he." He looked at Thomas with such naked adoration that Ava's heart squeezed. "We'll be here whenever you're ready. A week, a month, a year. Doesn't matter. You're worth the wait." Ava nodded, exhausted and overwhelmed and cautiously hopeful. Okay. The weeks after Thomas's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Ava moved into a new apartment, not the one Steve's company had provided, but one she chose herself, one she could almost afford with the money she'd earned. She needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own feet, even while knowing that Steve was there if she needed him. He came by every day to see Thomas, always respectful, never pushing, They fell into an easy rhythm, co-parents learning to navigate this strange new world they'd created. Sometimes Steve would bring dinner, and they'd eat together while Thomas slept. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, marveling at this tiny human they'd made. Ava started taking online classes toward finishing her degree. Steve had offered to pay, but she'd refused, taking out student loans instead. It mattered to her, being able to say she'd done it herself. He seemed to understand, never pushing, but she'd catch him watching her study with such pride in his eyes that her resolve would waver. Her sister, Maya, finally healthy and cancer-free, visited often. She adored Thomas and wasn't shy about her opinions on Steve. "He's completely in love with you, you know," Maya said one afternoon while Ava changed Thomas's diaper. "He's in love with his son," Ava corrected. "No, idiot, he's in love with you. The way he looks at you when you're not watching, that's not parental affection, that's the real deal." Maya grinned. "The question is, are you going to make him suffer much longer, or are you going to admit you're in love with him too?" "It's complicated," Ava protested weakly. "Love is always complicated. Doesn't make it less real." Maya's expression softened. "You deserve this, Ava. You deserve to be happy. Stop punishing yourself for being human." Those words echoed in Ava's mind for days. Was that what she was doing? Punishing herself? She thought about Steve's late-night texts, checking if they needed anything. The way he'd learned to change diapers and warm bottles without complaint. How he'd shown up at her door at 3 a.m. when Thomas had a fever. His own fear barely contained, but willing to be strong for both of them. 3 months after Thomas's birth, Ava found herself at the children's hospital where she'd started volunteering. She'd needed something to pour her energy into, something that reminded her of her teaching dreams. She was reading to a group of sick children when she felt eyes on her. Looking up, she found Steve standing in the doorway, Thomas asleep in his arms. The children noticed, and one little girl whispered loudly, "Is that your husband? He's handsome." Ava blushed. We're working on it," Steve said smoothly, moving into the room. The children gathered around to see the baby, and Ava watched as Steve handled their questions with patience and kindness. This was a side of him she'd rarely seen, unguarded, genuine, present. After the reading session ended, they walked together through the hospital gardens. Thomas had woken and was making soft baby noises, content in his father's arms. "He wouldn't stop crying," Steve said quietly. Nothing worked. Not a bottle, not a diaper change, not walking, not singing. But then I played him a recording of your voice reading one of his bedtime stories, and he calmed down immediately. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "He misses you, Ava. When you're not there, he knows, and so do I." "Steve, I know you need space. I know you need to figure things out. But I also need you to know that I'm not waiting because I have to. I'm waiting because I want to. Because you're worth waiting for." He shifted Thomas gently, reaching out with one hand to cup her face. "I love you, not because you carried my child, not because I feel guilty or obligated, but because you're you, stubborn and brilliant and stronger than anyone I've ever met. Because you make me laugh. Because you call me on my nonsense. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every single scene." Ava felt tears welling up. "I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. "I'm terrified. What if I mess this up? What if I can't be the man you deserve? What if history repeats itself and I lose you too?" His voice cracked. "But I'm more terrified of not trying, of letting fear win again." Thomas chose that moment to reach for Ava, his little arms stretching toward her. She took him automatically, and suddenly they were standing there, a family in every way that mattered except on paper. "I love you too," Ava whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you, Steve Harrington, even though you're arrogant and controlling and way too used to getting your way." He laughed, the sound filled with relief and joy. "I promise to work on all of those things." "You'd better." She smiled up at him, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, with their son between them. It wasn't the passionate kiss from the storm-lit library. It was better, a promise, a beginning, a choice they were both making with eyes wide open. Over Thomas's head, Ava saw other families in the garden, complicated, messy, beautiful families that didn't fit any traditional mold, and she realized that maybe that was okay. Maybe love wasn't about following a prescribed path. Maybe it was about finding the person who made the detours worthwhile. If you've made it this far, drop a like and share this with someone who believes in second chances and unexpected love stories. So, what now? She asked, resting her head against Steve's shoulder. Now, we figure it out together, he said simply. One day at a time, no contracts, no rules, just us. Just us, Ava repeated, and for the first time since this whole journey began, she believed it was enough. They stood there as the sun set over the hospital gardens, their son between them, building a future from the wreckage of the past. It wouldn't be easy, blending their lives, navigating his family's judgment, building trust from the ashes of a business arrangement. But as Thomas grabbed both their fingers in his tiny hands, linking them together, Ava felt certain of one thing. Love wasn't found in perfect circumstances or fairy tale beginnings. Sometimes it was forged in the messy middle, in delivery rooms and late-night feedings, and the choice to keep showing up even when it would be easier to walk away. Sometimes love was made, one heartbeat at a time. But here's the question that lingered in Ava's mind as they walked back toward their cars, their hands intertwined with Thomas between them. When does a business arrangement become real love? Is it in the contract we sign, the time we spend, or the moment we choose to stay when we could walk away? And if love can grow from such calculated beginnings, what does that say about the nature of love itself? Can it be engineered, or does it simply find a way, regardless of the walls we build around our hearts?